Hey everyone, not dead yet here. So the Ben Askren versus Jake Paul fight has come and gone, and Jake Paul has emerged victorious. What do I think of that? I think the outcome was obvious the second the two fighters stepped out of their corners. Anyone who has any kind of inkling of how to box would be able to see that Ben Askren is not a boxer. What do I think of the decision? I think it was a premature stoppage. I do agree that Ben Askren was a bit wobbly, but I do think that the ref should have let the fight go on at least a little bit longer, and then if he took another hard shot, stop the fight. But that's not what I'm here to talk about today. Because when it comes to Jake Paul in terms of a boxer, I think, yeah, he is a boxer. He's got a professional record. He is a pro. But I don't think he's a super... he should be held in a pro in really high regard, because what he's basically done is knock out bums to pad his record. He still hasn't even really fought a boxer. He has knocked out a YouTuber, a basketball player, and a wrestler, and I don't really think that's anything to brag about. It's very similar to people like Deontay Wilder having an impressive knockout record until you look at the fact that he knocked out people that were past their prime or fat and out of shape, right? He's not fighting the best of the best, and when he does come up against a decent challenge and someone who pushes him to the brink, I will be the first person to acknowledge that. But that's not what I want to talk about today. What I want to talk about today is the terrible organization of the Triller fight card and how that is going to be a massive detriment to the future of boxing. Because one of the big issues here is this wasn't a boxing card. This was a music show with a few fights sprinkled in. The card totaled 4 hours long for 4 fights. That is 1 fight per hour, and it is completely unacceptable. The cost for me was $40 Canadian, which means that I paid $10 a fight. Just for frame of reference, amateur matches have anywhere from 8 to 12 fights in a card and cost anywhere from $15 to $25, $30 if you're really expensive about it. So the average amateur card would be about half the price for double the fights and the same length of time. And I want to use this as a means to counteract the idea that YouTube boxing is good because it's getting more people onto the sport, or more eyes watching the sport. Because I want to ask, to those of you that bought this card, and those of you that love boxing like I do, if you knew someone who had never boxed before in his life, knew nothing about boxing, and was going to buy one card to watch to decide whether he wanted to be invested in the sport, would this be the card that you show him? I really hope that the answer is no, because this was a terrible fight card. A terrible, terrible card. And I think that the conversation that I had with a friend of mine after the fight is a good representation of how the average person views boxing after this. And he just simply sent me a couple text messages saying, well, have fun in your little boxing community now. Jake Paul is your champion. That's the future of boxing. I think I'll stick to UFC. And so this counteracts the whole idea that these YouTube boxing matches are putting more eyes onto the sport, because those that are watching the sport, because people are now leaving the sport in favor of UFC because they don't think boxing is fighting anymore, and those that are still watching are watching to gawk and laugh. This fight card was a joke. It was more centered around the YouTube personalities than it was around the boxing, with meme songs and songs from TikTok, the D'Amelio sisters giving out the belts looking like they were freaking toys. And here's the thing, they should have money to have decent looking belts, considering this is Triller. Triller has signed on Teofimo Lopez, Mike Tyson, and Evander Holyfield, absolute legends in the sport. And so people see that and they think, well, you know, these actual legends are fighting alongside, you know, people like Jake Paul, and if Triller's putting this on, it should be a relatively professional boxing match. But no, we had a slap fight in the middle of a boxing match. Why are we watching a slap fight? I paid for boxing, not slap fighting. And so people are going to look at that and go, this is what boxing is? This is what a professional boxing card looks like? I think I'll stick to UFC because I pay the same price and I get more fights, better fights, for the exact same price and time investment. So what I think this is ultimately doing is killing the sport faster than it could have possibly died when people were just no longer interested in it. Because now, not only are people leaving the sport, but people think it's a joke. At least before, you could make the argument that boxers were still, you know, the pinnacle of their craft. We used to be warriors, modern day gladiators, right? And now we're clowns at a circus, being gawked at by people who have no idea what it takes. And that upsets me. It genuinely does. Because to me, someone who's poured my heart, soul, and life into this sport, and I don't just think about myself here, I also think about the people who were crippled or died doing this, are now being lumped in with people like Jake Paul, and legendary fights are now being lumped in with Triller Fight Club's Jake Paul versus Ben Askren. And yes, to the people who know boxing will be like, well, no, you know, Tommy Hearns versus Marvin Hagler will never be lumped in with Jake Paul versus Ben Askren. But here's the thing, a lot of people don't know Tommy Hearns versus Marvin Hagler. A lot of people don't know the history of boxing, and so when you get into it and this is what they see, they will associate boxing with this. And that is not what I want. And it outright depresses me to think that this is what some people are going to think boxing is. It's a tragedy, in my opinion. And it's a disgrace to everything boxing is and everything boxing represents. And ultimately, it's going to lead to the death of the sport. And not only will it lead to the death of the sport, but the sport will die in ridicule. People won't look back on the magnificence that boxing was, because people don't tend to remember what happens before. They tend to remember the last thing that happened. It's one of the things they teach you in English literature. When you're writing an essay, make sure your strongest point is your final one, because that is what people tend to remember. So when boxing goes out, not with a bang, but with the honk of a clown horn, people are going to think of boxing as a joke of a fighting style and a joke of a sport. And I've already fought a ton of these preconceived notions as to what boxing is. People already think boxing is extremely easy. Throughout my upbringing, do you know how many times I've heard the phrase, well, boxing is just punching to the head, how hard can it be? And people think that boxers need to be big, dumb, muscle-bound, violent brutes that beat each other into submission. And these fights don't help break those preconceived notions, because one, it makes people seem like anyone can do it. Oh, this YouTuber just picked it up and now he's knocking people out left and right. Even though, again, he's not fighting real boxers. He's knocked out a YouTuber, a basketball player, and a wrestler. Not really the biggest brag, in my opinion. But they're also going to look at this and say, well, that doesn't look very technical. And because, like, let's take the first fight, for example. The guys are just kind of swinging for the fences. They have their hands by their waist. They aren't the masters of their craft, like people like Tommy Hearns and Marvin Hagler and Joe Frazier and Muhammad Ali, which are people that these commentators are likening these YouTubers to. You have these commentators that are trying to make the fight super hype. Oh, look, he's doing this. And, oh, I saw that he dropped his backhand, so I was setting stuff up. And yes, well, sure, that may have been his plan. I would like the commentators to be a little bit more critical of how these people fight in the ring, because again, when you step into that ring, you are a representative of that sport. And when you are commentating over this stuff, you are giving people who don't know much about the sport an idea of what good should be. So when they say things like, oh, you know, he's setting stuff up like Muhammad Ali used to do, they are going to think, what? Like Muhammad Ali was similar to this YouTuber? When in reality, it's like, sure, it's the same idea, but they're not applying those principles in the exact same way. This YouTuber is not doing what Muhammad Ali was doing to the exact same way Muhammad Ali was doing it. Sure, they may have similar ideas or similar styles, but Muhammad Ali was just way better at executing it than the YouTuber was. But people aren't going to get that idea when you have these commentators are like, oh my God, look at him set up those punches. Look, he was doing this, and then he brought him down. It's like, it's not really that exciting. It's rather sloppy, amateurish fights, and I wish that people would, the commentators would be a little bit more honest about that than trying to sell it as the next big thing. I had a conversation with someone in my DMs on Instagram who talked about how even really the Mike Tyson versus Roy Jones Jr. fight was kind of the start of all of this, and how that card was just as much of a joke as this one. But I don't think it was, because at least that card was marketed as simply an exhibition. This was marketed as this big professional fight, and it was treated like a joke. And because of that, if we keep having these exhibitions like the Mike Tyson one, or these joke of a professional matches like the YouTuber boxing matches are, people are going to see and think that boxing is nothing but a joke, and that is absolutely depressing. But how do we course correct? How do we stop the sport of boxing from going down this path of ridicule? Well, there are two things we can do. One is vote with our wallet and stop supporting these terrible, worse than amateur boxing matches, because so long as we show that we are willing to support mediocrity, they will continue to give it to us. And two is be very vocal and really push for big name super fights, things that would entice the casual viewer while also showing off just how beautiful the sport of boxing can be. Fights like Anthony Joshua versus Tyson Fury or Teofimo Lopez versus Ryan Garcia. We have to be proactive with this. We have to actively reject mediocrity and push for good, exciting, and better boxing fights. But that is just my opinion. If you agree with me, why not subscribe, give this video a like, comment, and do whatever you have to do. Share this around and hopefully spread the word. But until next video, I'm not dead yet, and if you aren't either, there is always a tomorrow waiting for you. Hopefully the tomorrow waiting for boxing is a lot brighter than the one that I predicted.